Welcome to Off Leash and Unfiltered. Trigger warning, I'm Katie Pepe, delivering the truth in dog training. So, let's say you've got a sneaky dog, which I know so many of you do. Don't we all? It's normal, by the way. Nothing unique about your dog if they're sneaky and they kind of wait until you're not looking, because they obviously learn that when you are looking, it's a problem, or it's at least an inconvenience because you kind of freak out, right? So now they've learned to just do it when you're not paying attention and you're otherwise occupied, or to just slink around a corner and do it. So I want to talk about that today because it is so common, and how do we eliminate that stuff? We're very, very good at it. We've had a lot of success with it. Our clients have had a lot of success with it when they follow the recipe, and the recipe is critical. So I want to talk about that recipe. Now, of course, it's going to involve structure. And I don't want to harp on structure. This isn't really an episode about structure. However, structure is absolutely going to be critical for you to be successful with this. Structure is your best friend. So first of all, what do I mean by structure, right? So I talk about structure a lot. If you've been listening to any of my other episodes, you hear me talk about this all the time. And basically what it means is you're taking away your dog's autonomy. You're taking away their freedom to make decisions. So they're not walking around your house choosing where to go, where to lay, what window to look out of, what toy to play with, what cushion to lay on. They're just not doing that because you're telling them where to be and what to be doing. And you're enforcing that. So they might be in their kennel, they might be on a place cot, they might be in a down command. But you're watching, you're addressing it if they leave, because it's important, obviously, that the dog is stationary and that you can trust them to stay there. So that training should really already be in place and done. If you're going to use anything besides the kennel, if you're going to rely on a command, that training needs to be complete where your dog knows that they can't break that command. But this is going to be really important. So we like the structure for what it does for the state of mind, for impulse control, for coping skills, teaching your dog they can't just follow you around or just inject themselves in everything anytime they want to. Teaches your dog to kind of shut off and calm down and resist impulses and all these wonderful, lovely things. But the other thing structure can do is it is your best friend when it comes to eliminating those sneaky behaviors that you have been wrestling with, maybe for months or maybe even for years. We hear that all the time. And structure is something we recommend. It's not necessarily something you need to do to that level forever. Of course not. For some dogs, that may be the best option, but most of the time, that's not necessary, right? But certainly early on in your training. And so what do I mean by early on? What I really mean by that is a dog that's very young, right? So under a year old, tons and tons of structure, especially under 6 months old, tons and tons of structure. Or a dog that's new to you, right? So maybe they're an adult dog, maybe they're an older dog, but you just got them. They're new to you, your family, they're new to your household. Tons and tons of structure. Or maybe you've just decided that you're ready for some change. You really want to dig in and turn everything on its head and really cultivate some change and get some training done, and just create new standards with your dog. Tons and tons of structure. So in all of those cases, you want a very high level of structure. It's going to be your best friend. And you can always wean off from that and move away from it when you want to, right? You're not ever stuck there, so don't be afraid of it. So a lot of people feel like, well, that's not why I got a dog, right? And that stuff's no fun, and I get it. But you're never stuck there, right? So try it. And certainly if you want to eliminate behaviors that are sneaky, you got to do it. You just got to do it. So what do? This is the stuff we're talking about with our board and train customers. When they come for their go home lesson, this is the first thing we're talking about. First, we fill them in on all their new equipment and some of the habits they should get into with that, and how to, care for it and put it on and off the dog and all those mundane details. But then we're talking about the structure piece. And one of the biggest reasons that we are talking about using the structure is, of course, all the lovely state of mind stuff, but also most people when they come in have some sneaky behavior or other that their dog has that they just don't like and they want to get rid of. So we're talking to them about how to utilize structure to help them do that. This is a critical piece to the recipe. Okay, so what does that mean? What do I mean when I say structure? I mean your dog's in their kennel or your dog's in a stationary command that they're not going to break, right? As I've already said, really important that training's done. You have to know that your dog is not going to break that command, or at least be watching. So if they do, you can address that and put them back. Okay, now that's important because you can't watch your dog 24 hours a day, guys. You can't do it. You've got a life. You've got other things to do. I don't care how boring your life is, right? And most of us don't have boring lives. We're all very busy, especially today's day and age. But even if you're one of those folks that says, oh, I'm retired, I'm just home all day with my dog, I've got all day, it doesn't matter. You're doing other stuff. I know you are. You're multitasking. And you can't do that and be successful. So what happens is, and I see this a lot with puppies, is people say, I'm watching, right? And if you can see me, I'm doing the air quotes. Well, I'm watching him while he's out, but people aren't. You aren't. I'm not. I've made the mistake because you just got other stuff to do. And so, yes, you're watching, but then all of a sudden you get distracted, you get sucked into something, dinner's burning, whatever it is, and now you're not paying attention, and now you're opening the door to go backwards and set yourself back. So just don't make that mistake. Don't try to cheat the system. Use it. Again, it's not forever. You're not locked into it for the rest of your dog's life. This is a tool to help you accomplish your goals, and then you can do whatever you want, right? I mean, you can always do whatever you want, but I see people shoot themselves in the foot over and over and over again because they're so resistant to using that structure piece. And it's like, yes, we want the dog to get their exercise and their attention and all that stuff. So you do that. You can do stuff with the dog. You can train with them. You can play with them. You can take them out, go for a walk, throw the ball around. You can do all that stuff. But inside the house or wherever the sneaky behavior is occurring, you can't give them freedom. Not until you know that they'll make better decisions and that they won't do that old behavior, right? So if you're still not sure if they'll do it, then that means you're not ready to trust them. You should already know that they're going to make the right choices before you actually trust them to do that. And I'm going to explain how we do that. What's that process? So you're using this high structure. Your dog has no freedom in the house. What you're going to do is you're going to start giving them just a couple of minutes or maybe a few minutes of freedom in the house, right? But you really are watching. So you're going to set up whatever the triggers or distractions are that would tempt your dog, right? A lot of dogs are into paper products for some reason. They like napkins, toilet tissue. Maybe that's your dog's thing. Or maybe it's shoes, or maybe it's the furniture, or maybe it's dirty diapers, or whatever it is, you need to set up those distractions, right? Or maybe your dog just goes around the corner and poops. Well, in that case, you just need to be able to sneakily follow the dog so they don't see you, so you can catch them in the act. But whatever it is, if you can set it up, right? Because you're doing yourself a huge favor. So people think that sounds mean. It's like, oh, we're setting the dog up to fail. I thought you were supposed to set the dog up to succeed. And it's like, well, it depends on what our goal is, right? So if our goal is to manage the dog and prevent the behavior, then sure, set the dog up to succeed. By the way, you don't need to listen to the rest of this episode if that's where your head's at. Okay, but if your goal is to actually get rid of the behavior, to actually wire your dog's brain, not to do that behavior that drives you nuts, and to make different choices on their own without intervention or management, then you need to listen to the rest of this episode. And you need to set up those distractions and set them up to fail. Because, again, you can't watch them all day. So it's imperative when you give them the freedom that they are going to be drawn to do those behaviors because you need them to do it while they're free and while you have that few minutes to actually keep eyes on them. So that's going to enable you to actually catch them in the act. That's going to enable you to have the conversation, and you won't get rid of these behaviors until you have the conversation. And you'll probably have to have it a couple times, maybe even a few times. Okay? So you give the dog just a few minutes. You've got the distraction set up. You've got the e-collar on the dog, which, by the way, if I haven't already mentioned, we use e-collar technologies collars. I love them. They are the best. I recommend them. However, if it's not in the budget for you, then get a cheaper collar. Okay? And here's the thing. We're doing a lot of different work with these collars. We're using low levels, we're using higher levels, we're doing advanced state of mind work, we're doing conditioning with obedience, and we're being very gentle. You're not doing any of that, right? So if you want to do that stuff, then you need to get a really good collar that can do that stuff. If you're not doing that stuff and you're just punishing behaviors, you don't necessarily need to get a fancy collar, right? Get one that you trust, but get what you can get, right? Because that's what you can get. So e-collar on the dog. Now, you're watching, pretend not to be watching, right? Because your dog will notice. Dogs become the masters at noticing when we're paying attention and when we've checked out. And that's why they're so good at getting these behaviors done the second we're mentally pulled away. They notice it. So you need to pretend that you're not paying attention, but you are. And the moment your dog goes to do the behavior, that's the moment that you need to say no. And then after you say no, go ahead and provide a very high correction. Now, what do I mean by very high? Well, if we're talking about a behavior that you never want to see again, and there's no context in which it's allowed, and you could never imagine trying to regenerate the behavior, like there might be a time where you want the dog to do the behavior again, then turn your collar all the way up, right? And maybe if your dog is super, super soft and sensitive, maybe you don't need to turn it all the way up. But here's the thing. We have people shoot themselves in the foot because they're too gentle, right? Because everybody feels guilty, everybody's afraid. And so now what happens is we use a level that might be enough to get the job done in the moment, right? The dog spits out the tissue or the shoe or whatever it is they're doing. But the next time we turn them loose, they weren't turned off enough to not test that boundary again. Right? So all we really succeeded at doing was annoying the dog or kind of freaking the dog out a little bit, but it was worth trying again. And so every time you do that, you now, first of all, put yourself in a position where you know you're going to have to do it again, and maybe multiple times, and you open the door of possibilities for them to continue doing the behavior, right? Because you failed to provide a consequence that was meaningful enough that your dog said, oh, not worth it, I'm not doing that again. Right? And yes, it might not be one and done. Even if you have your collar all the way up and it's very, very meaningful and it's a very unpleasant experience, it might still not be one and done. You might have to do it again and possibly even a third time. But it's really unlikely you'll have to do it more than that. Okay? Because the dog needs to see the pattern. They need to see that it actually occurs every time they do this behavior. And so, to that point, if you're not meaningful enough, they're going to test it again. Now, if they're going to test it again, there's also the chance that you're going to miss it. Right? And then what happens? Well, now the dog's discovering that that punishment actually is not consistent. And so that they actually, when you're not paying attention, they actually can do this thing. Right? Because you missed it now. So you have to understand that every time you fail to provide a consequence that's truly intolerable, you open yourself up to long-term failure because your dog is going to test it again, which means there's a chance that you'll miss it when they do. And then we're actually teaching the dog the opposite of what we want, because every time that happens, it's going to get more difficult to convince your dog that the punishment, that negative consequence, is actually consistent, right? To actually get them to believe it will happen each time I do it, right? Because now they've just experienced, well, it happened once, but it didn't happen again. And every time you do that, you now convince the dog more and more that the punishment is not consistent. So you can actually strengthen the behavior and make it more difficult to punish the behavior and eliminate it, right? Which is stupid. Like, we don't want that to happen. So the best thing you can do is to just be serious about putting the behavior to bed. Turn your collar up. Hold the button down for 2, 3, 4 seconds. And prepare yourself for that, okay? Because it's not pleasant. Some dogs are very, very vocal. It scares people. They feel bad, and I get it. But here's the thing. You're not going to have to do this anymore. Like, this isn't something you're going to do every day. You have a goal, and this is just a tool for you to reach that goal, and then you're done, right? And so we'll talk a little more about that. You do want to test your dog periodically and just check to make sure that behavior, doesn't regenerate and that they're not thinking about trying it out again. Because dogs are dogs, they're not robots, right? But for the most part, if you have good timing and you have a very high consequence, you might have to do it a couple of times, and then your dog is going to say, nope, I don't want any part of that. And then you're going to be able to give them their freedom back. And that's what everybody wants. That's what everybody wants. But so you set your dog up, you say no as they're about to do the behavior, then you follow that with a very high consequence. Now, here's another caveat. Sometimes when we're dealing with behaviors that occur mostly when we're not around, I might set it up to look like I'm not around, and I might hide around a corner, I might watch from outside through a window, I might use a camera. Although, word of caution, some cameras have a slight delay, so you should keep that in mind, right? You can use FaceTime on your phone, you can use a baby monitor, surveillance camera, whatever works. But what you can do, you've got the remote in your hand, you've got your finger on the button, it's preemptively already turned up to a high level. You can skip saying no as long as your timing is good. Your timing needs to be perfect. Meaning, the second your dog goes to do that behavior, you're pushing the button. Hold it down for a few seconds, right? But you're doing it simultaneous to the behavior. Versus saying no when they do the behavior and then following that with a correction. Even if they stop doing the behavior, you still have to follow with the correction. Okay, but so in essence, if you skip that no, then it more or less looks to the dog just like it always does. Nobody's around. The correction isn't even tied to you. It's tied to the thing. So for instance, with my dog, I made the cat food dish very hot. I hid out in my mudroom. I had a camera. He went for the cat dish, and I lit him up like a Christmas tree. Okay, so I made that cat bowl very, very hot. And he never went near it again, except for when my mother is here, which if you've listened to that story, it's hilarious. But I can leave him home alone all day now, and he won't touch the cat food because I've set that scenario up where he was by himself, and he learned that cat food dish is no joke. When this house is empty, he should stay away from it, right? But the timing was perfect. I made it very, very hot and uncomfortable the moment he went for the cat food. And so you can do that, and you can make your furniture hot, you can make your shoes hot, you can make the cat food hot, the cat box hot, the dirty socks hot, whatever it is. You can make the poop spot hot. Now, that's not for dogs that aren't housebroken. right? Dogs that are not housebroken, puppies, puppies that are just learning where to go. You should be using just structure and reward for potty outside, right? But if we have a dog that's an older dog that knows they're supposed to potty outside, they don't have a UTI, they don't have any infections, they don't have any medical issues, like they've been cleared by the vet, and we've used the structure and we've done all the training, and they'll still sneakily go into another room to potty. That's one instance where I say go ahead and correct your dog for that, because you've tried everything else and they're old enough now and they have no medical issues and they've gone outside lots of times with reward. And most people have shown at least some degree of irritation, frustration when their dog goes inside. The dog definitely knows it's undesired, and that's why they're slinking off now to do it. That's the only time we ever correct for potty in the house. But if you've tried everything else, you've been through all those processes, you've taken your dog to the vet, you've done all that stuff, they're a mature dog, they're not a puppy, like maybe you try correcting them for that, right? So maybe you set up a camera and you see them walking into their potty spot and you see them starting to sniff the floor and you see them starting to squat, and right then, that's when I would correct it. But potty stuff can be a little more complicated. So I mean, it's a very specific scenario in which I recommend that. Most of the time, we're doing other stuff. But whatever the thing is your dog does, you can just very silently from a distance with a camera, a window, whatever, make that behavior very uncomfortable. It's a simple concept, but people tend to mess it up, right, and do it wrong. And there's a variety of reasons for that. And one of the biggest reasons is that we don't like to use the structure. So then we just put ourselves in a position where the dog keeps doing the behavior and we miss it sometimes. And so we just stay stuck right where we were to begin with. The other reason we mess it up is because we don't dare to turn our level up. We don't dare to cause the dog, pain or discomfort. But it's just a very short correction, guys. It's like a second, a couple seconds, right? Maybe it's a few seconds if you feel this is something you need it. But big deal, right? Out of the entire day, it's a few seconds, maybe, of a correction, and then it's just over. And you increase the odds that you won't need to do it again, right? So you're going to have to do this fewer times if it's more meaningful. And that's why I always compare these corrections to the invisible fence, right? Because the invisible fence is so effective. And the reason it's so effective is because it isn't human, right? So we all know the invisible fence is very, very hot. It's very, very meaningful. It really packs a punch, but it's safe, right? We trust it not to actually harm our dog. Just like the e-collar corrections that we're doing. But it's very, very meaningful. It's very, very powerful. It makes an impact. It really inhibits a behavior. And the dog doesn't test that boundary anymore, probably ever, because they know it's just awful and they don't want to. Right? And so that's it. They never have to feel it again, right? As long as they respect that boundary. And it's the same thing with these behaviors that are driving you crazy. If you can be the fence and attach that powerful consequence to it, your dog won't do it anymore. I promise you. But most of us just have a very, very hard time doing that. And I understand. I totally do. Although it's so easy for me now, right? Because I just take it all for granted. I've done it so many times. I see how things pan out. I see the good that comes of it. I know what to expect. And so it's really easy for me to say, but people struggle. They have a really hard time. But when they do it, I've seen them be very, very successful and come out on the other side very, very proud of themselves. So you can do it. But very, very powerful consequence, and it does have to be consistent, right? You can't expect it to be one and done. If your dog does test that boundary again, and they might, you have to come in with the same consequence again. Right? And that's really a fork in the road there, right? Because if you provide that consequence again, you may very well have finally put that behavior to bed forever. Your dog does it a second time, they experience the same consequence, and maybe a third time, right? Let's just say maybe. Now they know. They're like, whoa, yep, this is consistent. This is a pattern. Every time I touch this object or I do this thing or I go to this place, this always happens and I hate it. Now you're cooking with gas because your dog's going to stop. They're going to stop doing that thing. But again, if you're too low and your dog keeps testing and you miss one, now you're going backwards. You're going backwards and your dog's going to keep testing that behavior and they're going to keep seeing intermittently that they can get away with it. So you have to be the fence, right? The fence doesn't bend the rules. They don't make exceptions. They don't feel guilty. They don't worry about if the dog's confused, right? It doesn't matter. The consequence and the boundary are always the same, always the same, always the same. And that is how your dog will learn the fastest, right? So if the consequence is kind of annoying, if the consequence is lower, if the consequence is inconsistent, sometimes it happens, sometimes it doesn't, sometimes it's moderate, sometimes it's high, you're going to drag this thing out forever, right? You might never get there. You might even strengthen the behavior you don't like because you're missing it half the time, right? So if the fences did that, all of our dogs would be at large. Now, let's just say your dog is confused. Well, so what? So what's going to clarify confusion? I'm going to do an episode on this too because it's a really big topic in our lessons with the humans. And I can see where they're coming from. And so I'd like to take some time to dig into that a little bit because I think that's kind of a fascinating topic. And when you really think about it, it makes sense. But it also kind of makes sense from their perspective. Like I can see what they mean. But if you understand the learning process and you take that emotion out of it, which is usually the problem, and you use a more rational mindset to evaluate things and to think things through, it makes a lot of sense that it doesn't matter if they're confused. The way you're going to clarify that confusion is by keeping the consequence the same. So what could possibly be more confusing than a variable consequence? Right? That's confusing. Now, if I wasn't sure that crossing that boundary gave me a shock, but then I crossed that boundary and I got one, well, guess what? Now it's clarified. I might have been confused before, but I'm not anymore. Right? But if I cross it and there isn't a shock or there's a very low shock, well, now I stay confused. Because now I'm still not really sure what happens or what's going to happen. It's not the same as what's happened before. So it's important, if you really care about your dog being confused and you want to make sure you clarify everything for them, that you stay consistent no matter what. Right? If the boundaries move, if the consequences move and things are changing and there's no real predictability, then the confusion can't possibly ever be resolved. But so you're going to give your dog a few minutes of free time. You're going to set them up. You're going to make the behavior very uncomfortable with a very high correction. And then you're just going to go about your business like nothing happened. Don't rush over to your dog. Don't apologize. Don't feel guilty. Right? If you're struggling with this, have some tissues in your pocket, but leave your dog alone. So important. Just act like you have no idea what happened or what's going on. And just go about your life. Put them back on place or in their kennel to just kind of settle down, or take them outside for a walk if you want to, especially if you're like all distraught now. Because I know some people will be. And that's okay. Take your dog out. Go do something positive with them if you want to. Like go for a walk. Go do some really easy training. Use some food. Whatever you want to do. Go throw the ball around. But just don't coddle them post-correction. That's important. And then you're just going to go back to using your structure, right? So you correct your dog once. You can't then just jump into freedom. You're going to go back to your structure. and you're going to give them a few minutes again, maybe later that day, right? And then the next day. And you're going to keep setting them up, and you're going to keep watching. Now, after a period of time that you've been giving your dog these short sessions of free time, and they're making totally different choices consistently, now maybe you're good to start giving them longer windows of free time, right? But still watch. And then after a period of time, it's like, okay, maybe you can actually just start trusting your dog, right? But don't rush it. 2 tips. Don't rush it. Make sure you set this up numerous times so you can actually see your dog make a better choice consistently. Don't rush the freedom. Do it gradually. Number 2, don't manage the dog with warnings. So a lot of us will set up this whole operation, we'll correct the dog, we'll do a great job at it. But then if we think the dog is thinking about it, we'll give them a verbal. Or no. Right? Or we'll say their name. Right? So we're giving them a warning instead of just letting them make the choice and us providing the feedback. I did a whole episode on that, by the way. Great episode. I don't remember what number it is, but go back and look for it if you haven't listened to that. I think it's a fantastic episode because it's so important to let your dog make decisions, right? How many times do I see a dog go to jump on somebody and they manage the dog with body language, they manage the dog with verbals, instead of just letting the dog do it and then correcting the dog for it, right? Which is the only way to make the behavior go away. So if you start falling into this, well, I already corrected the dog once and I don't want to do it again, so I'm just going to manage them with verbals and with warnings. You're now falling into that trap where you're not having the conversation. You're not having the one you should be having anyway. You're having a very naggy conversation that's going to kick the can down the road. Your dog still wants to do the behavior, and you're not willing to let them so that you can punish the behavior. Right? So inevitably, what's going to happen? They're going to do it again. But don't forget, the goal here is you do this the way we're describing, and it goes away, right? And again, that's not to say that your dog is going to be a robot and perfect forever. Periodically kind of set it up and just see, like, make sure they're not thinking about doing it again, right? Because it might creep back, but if the more meaningful your correction is, and the more well-timed it is, so it's tied to the behavior, the less likely they're going to try it again, guys. Right? So you're doing yourself a favor and your dog a favor if you just get it right the first time. Right? This isn't something you should have to do all the time. But, it should be expected, like, periodically, that you might need to touch up a behavior because your dog is a living organism, and they just do stuff. Behavior does stuff. Brains do stuff, right? So don't be surprised if you have to touch it up again at some point, but if you know how to create an inhibition, you should be able to create one that really sticks long term, right? And so that then you can trust your dog, but again, just take it slowly. So give them lots and lots of very short windows so that you can watch them. And then if they're doing great, expand those windows. And then if they're doing great, maybe you can actually stop watching, right? But you should already know that there's not going to be a problem, right? If you're wondering how it's going to pan out, if you're wondering how they're going to do, if you're wondering if they're going to make a mistake while you're gone getting groceries, then you're not ready. You should already know because you've set it up so many times. You've pretended to leave so many times, all that stuff, that you know they do the right thing. And I think this does so much for our relationship with the dog because it creates so much frustration when your dog does this stuff that's so sneaky. It can be really, really irritating. And it does that those irritations, they worm their way into your relationship with your dog. So I know this isn't the funnest part of training, but it's like if you really want the best relationship with your dog, then you can't afford to not do these things and have these moments and have these conversations. And then you can brag, hey, my dog doesn't do that, right? My dog won't eat the pizza off the table when I leave the room. Right? And you can teach your dog anything you want to as long as you're consistent and you stick to those principles. Right? You can teach your dog, hey, if I'm eating dinner and I leave my dinner on the floor, you don't go near it. How many people do you know that can say their dog won't eat their dinner if they leave it on the floor? You don't, because all of your friends are doing things like storing their shoes on top of the fridge so the dog won't chew them. Right? And the biggest problem with that is management fails. And then your dog's going to chew your shoes, right? Your expensive shoes. They don't know how much they cost. They don't care. So I'm a firm believer that it really does wonders for our relationship. And then you can include your dog more. You can give them more freedom. You can trust them more. It's just wonderful all the way around. And the only cost was a couple of uncomfortable corrections. Right? And then you're probably done. Then it's just moving into the period where the probationary period where you're still supervising in case, but you probably won't have to do it again. And then that's it. You just have a dog you can trust, which is great. The one other thing I will add is that if you throw an e-collar on your dog just to do this, just to eliminate some behaviors, that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that at all, but leave it on. Put it on every day. Okay, rotate it now and then to a different spot so that your dog doesn't get sores from having it just sit in one spot. But leave it on. Leave it on for a good long time. Okay, it doesn't matter if you don't think you need it. Please, 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 I'm begging you, leave it on, because what will happen? Your dog will learn that they can still do the bad behaviors when it's not on, because if they do that even once, right? If they have a lapse in judgment, they make a bad decision, or you haven't punished it properly, and they go to do it again, and there's no consequence because there's no e-collar, then guess what? You have just created a dog that will do this behavior forever without their e-collar on. So the best thing you can do, and this is something we're sharing with our board and train customers that go home too, is leave that e-collar on every day, every day, every day, every day, until you know that behavior is not going to happen anymore. And then maybe you leave it on anyway, just in case a new behavior crops up. So we always recommend that. Like, it's great to have your e-collar on, right? It's a safety belt. Even if you don't think you're going to need it, what if you do? You can't use it if it's not on the dog, guys. And you can absolutely screw yourself this way. We see it all the time. People have two different dogs, one with the collar on, one with the collar off. Don't let that be you. Just leave it on for now. All right, guys, that's it for today. Hopefully you found something helpful in this episode that you can apply at home. Thanks for joining me. Please, please, please write in. Give me your suggestions, topics you'd like discussed. Send me your questions to Kati at diamondk9.com. That's Kati, Kati, at diamondk9, CANINE.com. Would love to hear from you. Thanks again for joining us today, and I look forward to next time.